Welcome to the Athena Wellness Podcast, the show that invites you to take a seat around the community fire and listen to stories that inspire. I'm your host, Kathy Robinson, author, coach, and founder of Athena Wellness, a company that's dedicated to supporting you on your journey to live more wholeheartedly. Today's episode is brought to you by the Athena Wellness Academy, your resource for wholehearted living. The Academy's featured offering is an online course called From Type A to Type B, How to Mindfully Descend the Corporate Ladder and Invite What's Next. This course is perfect for you if you're contemplating or navigating a professional transition, and it's available as a self-study or with a small cohort of students facilitated by me, Kathy Robinson. To learn more, I invite you to go to athenawellnessacademy.teachable.com or click on the link in the show notes. Hello and welcome. Thanks so much for joining me. Today's episode is about what happens when you're completely invested in an identity that's been formed and lived for years until it's swiftly swept away. It's about navigating the intensity of such a transition, and it's about mining the inner depths of the self to invite reinvention. I'm joined today by writer Karen Salita, who was a competitive snowboarder before injuries launched her into an existential crisis. Much of the work she's done in the wake of leaving the snowboarding lifestyle is channeled into her writing, which is her outlet to positively impact those around her. She shares her lessons learned through her blog called Follow Your Wiggle and in her book, 101 Soul Seeds for Reinventing Yourself. Here's what we cover. The transitional journey from competitive snowboarding to a new life. The loss of identity and purpose in times of transition. How unconditional well-being helps with reinvention, and what it means to follow your wiggle. You can learn more about Karen at karensalita.com, and I'll put a link to her website in the show notes. And now on to the show. I hope you enjoy this inspiring conversation. Karen, welcome to the Athena Wellness Podcast. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. I've really been looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. So please share a bit about who you are and what you do.
That's such a big question. If I were to define myself, I would say that I am an inner explorer. I am an outer adventurer. I'm a creative problem solver. And I'm a compassionate ideator. An inner exploration because I love to travel and I love exploring new lands, new countries. And when I travel as an explorer, I like going to where the people are. I want to go and just drink a cup of coffee and just watch people navigate their daily lives and kind of immerse myself in the nuances of the experiences of these people in this land that is different from what I'm used to. And it wasn't until I was able to approach my own inner exploration with that same sense of curiosity that I began to shift my experience into something that was filled a lot more with sort of a sense of awe and wonder with my own personal experience. And that really opened up my journey from there and gave me the space that I needed to engage in the kinds of activities that helped me to create a much more fulfilling life. But, the inner exploration, the outer adventure, I described myself as a creative problem solver as well. And I have a 20-year career in industrial sales, which is a career that I describe as basically just making friends and solving problems on a daily basis. And being able to sort of transform situations creatively in the business world has really inspired me to start learning how to transform situations creatively in my own personal life. Being able to look at my own challenges and say, you know what, there's more than one way to look at this situation. And if I were coming in as my own, contractor, how would I address this? And how would I create additional ways of navigating the challenges that I'm facing? That said, I did also just enroll in graduate school for the first time at the age of 45. So I'm looking to transform my career. I'm still working full time and engaged with graduate school, which means I'm very busy these days, but also very inspired, which is a really great space to be in. And along the way, I have learned to become a compassionate ideator. So I really enjoy sharing the lessons that I've learned through my experiences and through the grief that I experienced in my past and along the way. And I've been able to transform that grief and those experiences in a really positive and meaningful way. And as I look out at the world around me, I see so many other people out there also experiencing grief and suffering. And I really find it, I don't know, I feel called to help convey that information to them in a way that helps them transform their own grief and suffering. And I do that through my writing. So I have a blog where I put a lot of my thoughts and ideas, and I did publish my first book last year, which I know we're going to talk about. It is 101 Soul Seeds for Reinventing Yourself. And that gives me a lot of joy to be able to put those ideas out into the world. So that is who I have become.
And that is the most comprehensive answer I've ever gotten to that question. So I appreciate it. I know that was heartfelt. And so thank you for that. And you hit on a number of themes that we're going to be diving into. The first one on reinvention really starts from that first transition when you did have to reinvent yourself, going from a professional or competitive snowboarder to becoming a sales professional and doing some of the things that you're doing today. So can you take me back to that point of, first of all, what made you want to be a competitive snowboarder? And then how did that career go? And then how did you and why did you need to transform?
So snow sports have been a part of my life ever since I can remember. I grew up in Utah, and I spent most of my youth growing up in Park City, Utah, which is a pretty famous ski town for people who are familiar with that world. And my parents were actually both ski instructors. So, for a lot of kids, that's a dream. You're on the mountain every weekend. I mean, the general rule when I was growing up was you have two choices on the weekends. You can either go skiing or you can stay home. That's it.
And was your way of rebelling by picking up a snowboard instead of two skis?
Yeah, actually it was. So the funny thing was I had been skiing since I was about 6. But the challenge with being the child of ski instructors is that I was basically their guinea pig, which meant every time they were working on new ski instructing techniques, we would go skiing and then they would have me, ski over to that pole and then stop. And then they would whisper to each other and then they'd ski down and then they'd critique my skiing. And then they'd have me work on, these exercises to improve my skiing, which is really frustrating when you're a kid. So back in about 1989, this thing called snowboarding came around. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, I want to do that. And as soon as I tried it, and of course it was really fun to begin with, but what I really loved about it initially was that I could be on the mountain with my parents and they couldn't say a thing. They could not critique me and we could actually enjoy each other's company, and I was sold. So the rule was I had to ski one day and snowboard one day every weekend, and that lasted for I think one season. And after that, it was the skis went into the corner, and yeah. So I just started snowboarding full time from there, and then so I was in junior high at that time, and then they started having local competitions when I was in high school, and at the time there weren't I mean, there weren't very many people snowboarding, period, but there definitely weren't very many girls. So I had to compete with the boys, but it gave me a tremendous sense of confidence and a sense of belonging, which for me was tremendous because I was a socially awkward kid. I was definitely not one of the cool kids. And in a ski town where all the kids skied, very few transitioned over to snowboarding early on, because why you're going to do something new when you're already, accomplished at this other sport. So I was an early adopter, and then snowboarding started to get cool. And all of a sudden, I started becoming what I call cool-ish, right? Like I wasn't exactly cool, but I was cooler than I had been, prior to learning how to snowboard. And so that really became a big part of my formative years, and being able to kind of hold my head up high when I would walk down the hall and I had all the cool snowboarding stickers on my binders, and the kids would be like, "Hey, cool sticker." And I'd be like, "Yeah." So it really fulfilled a lot in my life. In terms of helping me to build my confidence. And by the time I was in college, I was doing really well. I was nationally ranked and just having a really good time. And, I spent a lot of time, actually, I got good by tagging along with the older guys. I was kind of like the little sister. The rule was if I could keep up, I could ride with them. And the minute I couldn't keep up, they were gone. So I had a big incentive to keep up, which meant I went where they went. If they went off jumps, I was going off jumps. If they were going through the trees, I was going through the trees. Like I was not going to lose them. And so that is how I developed my skills. And it was really a tremendous joy. It was a lot of fun. And it continued being fun well into my 20s until I started having some pain in my back from all of the places that I took myself and situations that I put myself in. So back in 2005 or so, I started having chronic pain issues, and I started going to see doctors and seeing, what was up. Was this just a strain? Is this just something where they'll say, take it easy for a couple of weeks and you'll be good? But the imaging that they did revealed that my spine was basically aging faster than the rest of my body because of all the impact. And for anybody out there who's familiar, my disciplines were half pipe and slope style. So that meant I was going off of a lot of jumps. I was basically hurling myself in the air a lot. And, not all the landings are very smooth. So my spine had aged about 20 years more than my body. So when I was about 30, the doctor said that my spine looked like that of a 50-year-old. And, a lot of them were saying, well, are you ready for surgery? I was like, no, definitely not. And so everything really came to a boil when I was working with my therapist at the time. And she said to me, what will you do if you can't snowboard anymore? And in that moment, the only response I could come up with was, I think I'll die. And it sounds dramatic, in reflection, but it was not overly dramatic at the time. And I didn't mean that I would physically die. I certainly wouldn't have harmed myself at that point. But what I imagined in my mind was that I would psychically wither away and there wouldn't be anything left to me. And that reaction, that response actually kind of caught me off guard. I didn't realize how desperate I felt in that moment. And that meant that I needed to figure out why I felt so incredibly desperate. And what I began to uncover was that snowboarding had become my identity. It had become the source of all of my good feelings. I used my experiences with the sport and with the people, and I had gotten into punk rock music, and I'd learned how to skateboard, and I was going to all these punk shows, and I was in the mosh pit, and I was really living my life very fully. But I realized that I was using a lot of those experiences to validate myself because I had not come to terms or made peace, or I hadn't healed, I'll say, from my experiences in childhood of being bullied. Um, I had a very uncomfortable childhood socially. And when snowboarding came along, it covered up a lot of that sensation of being tremendously flawed. And it was as if I put on a big cloak over myself to hide all of that insecurity and all of that vulnerability and all of those pain points. And snowboarding hid it. And when the threat of having snowboarding removed from my life came up, what came up for me was all of those painful experiences, and the painful identity that I had underneath that was suddenly exposed. And I felt naked and alone. And I remember thinking back then, is this how the rest of my life is going to feel? And if that's how the rest of my life is going to feel, I don't want to feel it. And that was what prompted me to have the reaction and the response that I did. And so that really, I had to make a choice. I said, do I want to allow myself to wither away for the rest of my life? And do I want this to be what my experience of life is going to be? Or do I want to do something about it? Do I want to figure out how to shift or change this so that I can actually have a life that I enjoy living? And I chose the second one. I didn't know how I was going to go about doing it, but that was the choice I made. And I became very committed to finding a way forward.
Yeah, one of the questions that I had for you was on loss of identity and finding purpose. And so you gave me a nice summary of what it felt like to be in this place where everything that I was, I am no longer. What are some of the things that you did to get to the other side of that?
Yeah. Well, I spent a long time searching for wisdom. And I went, I was on all the meetup groups. I was just looking for anything that felt like it fit for me. And I did that for a few years, actually. I think I went through that process for about 3 years, which was really hard, but I was very committed to it until I made a discovery that began the shift that led to who I am today. And that discovery was the spiritual study of Kabbalah. And for people who don't know, Kabbalah is a very ancient form of spirituality through Judaism. And it happens that I am Jewish, so I knew a little bit about Kabbalah, but only a very teeny tiny bit. And suddenly a Kabbalah study group popped up in my community. And I would say that I was at a very low point at that time, but I went to my first study group meeting. And just within the period of an hour, I felt like I was a Russian doll, the dolls that are nested inside of one another, and that who I was on the outside did not reflect who I was on the inside. And through the course of this 1 hour, I could feel a couple of the outer layers were removed, and I got a little closer. I got a little closer to who I was on the inside. And so I started studying regularly for years. And what enabled the transition to begin was this ancient Kabbalistic concept that's called tikkun. And anybody who's Jewish knows that a foundational ideology is what's called tikkun olam, which means repairing the world or healing the world. But the Kabbalists had a much deeper interpretation of tikkun, which was that we each have each of our souls are on a journey, and this lifetime is just one part of that journey. And we are born into this lifetime, into this journey with our own personal tikkun. And our own personal tikkun is that aspect of our soul that we're here to heal, that we're actually here to repair. And everybody's tikkun is different. We're all here for a different form of healing or repair. And that the game that we get to play in this lifetime is the process of going through that repair and that healing. And what they say is that negative emotion and, those areas in our lives where we find ourselves being very reactive are clues in this little scavenger hunt that helps us to identify our own tikkun. And by being in the community of people who are all studying this at the same time, we were sharing about what our tikkun was and what our journey was and what our triggers are and how our negative emotion shows up. And all of a sudden I'm realizing, I'm not wrong. I'm not flawed. I'm not bad. None of this negative emotion reflects anything negative about me. It's just part of my journey. And when I started looking at that inner journey, kind of as that inner explorer, I could look at myself with a sense of curiosity, like, isn't that interesting? When I'm in this environment, I feel negative emotion. And that's unexpected. Where does that come from? And I started asking a lot of questions and I started to peel back the layers. And it really led me back to my childhood and being able to kind of have the sense of compassion for my inner child that was, treated very poorly by my peers and not by my family. I had a very supportive family life, but my peers were very unsupportive and hurtful. And I could really look at that inner child and see how she kind of came along with me in life. And I started to help her understand that the bullies were actually probably had hurtful home lives and hurtful childhoods themselves, and that the only way that they could cope was by hurting other people, and I just happened to be there and I happened to be awkward, so I was a good target, and I had that developed that sense of compassion. And as I developed that, I was able to share some of those experiences in social situations with other people, even perfect strangers, and that gave them permission to reveal some of their insecurities and their vulnerabilities. And I'm realizing we're all in this together. And then I just began to really love myself and love all the people around me. And that opened up so many possibilities for moving forward in an empowered way. And that's what I hope to kind of impart to other people through my writing and speaking and things like that.
Yeah, it's interesting how there are multiple times that you've kind of taken these offshoots, like so from skiing to snowboarding,
Yeah.
raised in a more traditional Jewish religion to where you wound up and what your saving grace was, in working with the
Yeah.
Kabbalists, which I think is just fascinating.
Yeah.
I also love the idea of the Russian dolls and how you kind of, when we're talking about identity loss, there is that shedding of the outer. And then what you're finding are these multiple layers as you're going in closer and closer. But still your outer world, and I'm going back to the time when you're making this transition, your outer world doesn't change, right? You still have all your punk rock friends and all of your snowboarding friends. You're going through this tremendous change and looking for first external answers, which are bringing you more internally. How do you align the inner and outer worlds? Like, how did that finally shift?
Yeah. That's such a great question. I started developing multiple communities for one thing. So I still have my punk rock community. I still have my punk rock sisters, my punk rock girls who we still go to concerts all the time. And so I'm still in that world, but I'm tuned in a lot more to sort of the roots of the emotion behind punk rock. Punk rock it's full of a lot of people who were rejected from traditional culture.
Absolutely.
Right? Which is why I gravitated toward it, because I felt that I didn't have to be perfect. I didn't have to be part of this scene that was so cool when I was growing up. I could be part of this community of people who are all social deviants and, who all felt rejected in one aspect of life or another. And punk rock is also very much about social and political commentary.
Absolutely.
So a lot of punk rock is about really identifying an ideology that you get behind and then actually going out there and vocalizing it to create social and political change. So it's not as big of a stretch as one might, believe. Judaism really promotes a lot of social action and social justice, tikkun olam, healing the world, repairing the world through our actions. Punk rock does the same thing. They just look a little bit different.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So there was an aspect within punk rock and snowboarding that tapped into an aspect of who I knew myself to be at a very deep level. I just didn't have the vocabulary for it at the time. And so, the rebellion of that world of punk rock, skateboarding, snowboarding is actually very much about allowing yourself to go against the grain and say things that may not be as, according to social convention, but things that need to be said and not needing other people's approval, which I wanted to be that so much when I was young that I took on that identity on the outside, but I needed to integrate that ability to speak my truth without needing validation or approval from other people. I needed to weave that or integrate it into that the inner self, the Russian doll that was embedded most deeply inside of me. And that has been the journey is kind of aligning who I wanted to be and how I wanted to show up in the world with who I actually believe myself and see myself to be on the inside. So it really has been a weaving together of what may seem like two different worlds, but aren't really so separate.
And that analogy holds, right? So when I asked the question, I was thinking about people who go through transition, say they're leaving long-term careers, and then suddenly that structure is no longer there, just like your snowboarding structure wasn't there.
Yeah.
A lot of your friends are there. So then how do you create this new life? And, the Russian doll analogy is the same for that, right? It went from the mosh pit to a deeper layer of activism,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
That essence of what punk rock is. And the same thing then for religion, from something that was more formal or maybe more conventional to the healing essence of what it's all about.
Yeah.
So it wasn't only your inner world where you were taking off the layers, it was the outer world as well until they blended.
Yes.
Or until there was an alignment.
Yes. And they weren't aligned for a while, but I knew I could sense that was the direction that I wanted to head in, and that helped guide quite a bit of my process.
Wonderful. So as you mentioned, you recently wrote a book, 101 Soul Seeds for Reinventing Yourself. So tell us a bit about how that came about and a little bit about the book.
Yeah. So I'm a very thoughtful person. I talked about this dynamic emotional landscape and that I'm an inner explorer, and I'm filled with thoughts on a daily basis. So I had been in the habit of carrying a notebook around with me throughout my days, throughout my job, and I was constantly writing things down, ideas and inspirations that would come up. And eventually I just felt like I had acquired all of these ideas, all of this wisdom, much of which came from, wise people around me. And I was just kind of taking little bits and pieces of it as I felt that it was meaningful. And I felt like it wasn't fair for me to keep it to myself, that really wisdom and inspiration is here to be shared. And there was a certain moment at which I kind of had what I would call a download of information where I thought, what am I going to do with all of this? And this idea came, I should write a book. And the moment that thought crossed my mind, information just started gushing through me so fast. I grabbed my notebook and I'm trying to write it down, and I can't write down the ideas nearly as fast as they're coming. And that's how I knew that, okay, this needs to happen. This needs to be done. And, I started out with writing my blog, and then I had the opportunity to compile everything into this book. But, I will tell you that writing the book has also been transformative to me as I've been, it's not like you reinvent yourself once and you're done. What I've learned through this is that reinvention is iterative. It is happening all the time. And what we're doing is we're not reinventing ourselves to become somebody different. We are reinventing ourselves to become more of ourselves in every moment. And who we are in each moment is also constantly changing. I like to define identity as just the identification of what we value in that moment. And what we value in each moment changes as we evolve through our lives. And so naturally, our identities are going to change as our values change, as we evolve. And as we evolve, we have opportunities to show up in the world in ways that are aligned with what we value and how we identify ourselves. But we are so ingrained in our actions and our beliefs and thoughts, and it becomes hard to show up in new ways. And so really, my book is just I call it a guidebook, but it's an accompaniment for a person who feels like who they are on the inside doesn't quite match how they're showing up on the outside anymore. And they want to begin going through the process of aligning who they feel themselves or know themselves to be or want themselves to be. Because if we have a desire to be a certain person, it's because that person already exists within us and we recognize it. But we may have a lot of fear or false core beliefs or cultural stigmas that are preventing us from being that person that we want to be. We have to draw ourselves out. And it's not something that needs to happen quickly either. It is something that can happen very slowly over time. And so my book gives 101 individual ideas on how you can begin drawing out the person that you feel you are most aligned with or would like to be aligned with, and to give yourself permission to start showing up in those ways on a daily basis. So the book is very easy to read. The concepts are simple, but they go deep. And you can go as quickly or as slowly through that process as you feel.
And it's a helpful guidebook because if we don't take that journey, that's where life regret comes in.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
You use a term that I never heard before, which is unconditional well-being. So can you share a bit about what that means and how that helps with reinvention?
Yeah. So I found within myself, and I've heard it reflected back to me from other people as well, that a lot of people base their sense of well-being on how other people around them are responding to them, or they will base their sense of well-being on conditions that are outside of themselves. So, an example is I will feel a sense of well-being when I'm no longer stressed about money. I will feel a sense of well-being when I feel that my partner appreciates me and loves me unconditionally. I will feel a sense of well-being when I lose 50 pounds. I will feel a sense of well-being when fill in the blanks, ... And then when we do feel a sense of well-being, what has led up to that and how long does that sense of well-being last? So for me, my sense of well-being for a very long time was based on snowboarding and how my snowboarding community responded to me and how well I was doing in my competitions, and if I was pulling off my tricks or if I was chickening out and not trying them. My sense of well-being was very much based on how I felt about what was going on around me, which meant that I was just bobbing on the ocean of life, going wherever the current was going to take me. So that I call conditional well-being, when my well-being is based on conditions around me, how people around me are responding. Unconditional well-being happened for me and happens, and I still have to, it's not like, oh, you learn unconditional well-being and boom, you've got it for life. No, it's, every day I have to remind myself. But unconditional well-being starts when we really turn our love inward. When I love myself unconditionally, meaning I love myself when I have a bad hair day, I love myself when I have gained too much weight, I love myself when I say something stupid in public and people laugh at me, right? When I can love myself without condition and turn that love inward, I can also radiate that love outward, and I can feel a sense of being well in my being unconditionally, regardless of what's going on around me, regardless of who is around me. And, that's kind of what I strive for every day, is to feel a sense of unconditional well-being, that my well-being is not based on whatever's going on in my life.
Yeah. And you mentioned before, as you were describing this idea of waves. And so when you're, not in that state, you're more, you can get battered by whatever it is that's going around. But when you drop deeper, it doesn't matter what the weather is or what's happening on the surface, because you're in a place where you really can't be stirred.
Right. And it is something that needs to be attended to every day. I'll have days where it is far easier for me to feel stable in my wellness and my well-being and to navigate the world in that place. And then I'll have days where it's a little bit more challenging, but I can kind of use that as my to be part of my gratitude practice and to be the source of my meditation practices. Is how can I re-anchor myself to my own sense of well-being regardless of what's happening in my life? So there are waves and there are currents that we navigate, but that is always what I'm trying to come back to.
Wonderful. You mentioned your blog a few times. Can you share a bit about your blog and where people might be able to find that?
Yeah, my blog is called Follow Your Wiggle, and it is about being able to tune into our bodily sensations that let us know when we are in a space that provides us with a sense of well-being, or, when we are in a space that feels nourishing for us. For a long time, I didn't know, what do I need was a question. What do I need to feel good or to feel better? And so what I learned is that I have a sensation in my body that I call my wiggle. And I would compare that to maybe what a dog feels when it's wagging its tail. If a dog's wagging its tail, it is engaged in something that makes it really happy in that moment. Well, I realized that I have a sensation in my body that lets me know that what I'm engaged in right now feels really nourishing to me. And I can use that to help guide me toward more experiences that feel nourishing. So my own wiggle was a really big part of me coming back to myself and being able to engage in the kinds of activities that my soul feels satisfied with. And so in my blog, I just explore all of these ideas about how to find and follow your wiggle, and also how to address the reasons that we don't follow our wiggles, which are things like fear or negative expectation or negative core beliefs. I don't deserve to engage in this activity that makes me wiggle because fall in the blanks. So following my wiggle helped me along my journey. So I use my blog to explore ideas to help other people find and follow their own wiggles. And it's anybody who's interested in exploring my blog can find it very easily on my website, which is karensalita.com.
And of course, we will link everything up there. Are there any parting words you'd love to share with our listeners?
I would just encourage everybody, if you feel the desire to connect with a part of yourself that you have not given the space to show up with in your life, start giving yourself permission to explore that. You deserve to have the kind of experiences that feel fulfilling. And if you feel like those experiences are lacking, that's okay. That's part of your journey. Give yourself the opportunity to maybe explore those a little bit more.
Hear, hear. That sounds wonderful. It's such a great conversation, Karen. I really thank you for your time today and appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I know there are many ways you can spend your time. Thank you for choosing to spend it with me. Until our paths cross again, be kind to yourself and show your warrior spirit some love. If you know anyone who could benefit from today's episode, please pass it on. And many thanks for supporting the show by subscribing and leaving a review. It means a lot, and it helps others find their way to our circle. If you'd like to access the show notes, have a question you'd like addressed on a future episode, or would like a transcript of this episode, visit www.athenawellness.com/podcast. Until next time, be well.